welcome to a special edition of the Ankler Podcast. This is Sean McNulty of the Wake Up Newsletter here at the Ankler, and I'm joined by Natalie Jarvie of the Like and Subscribe newsletter, who had a great dive into the Webtoon business at the NAB show earlier this month in Las Vegas with David Lee, the COO and CFO of Webtoon, and David Madden, who heads up the entertainment group at Wattpad Webtoon Studios. So Natalie, what makes Webtoon stand out to you in the creator space? You see a lot. What catches your eye here about Webtoon?
Well, Sean, one of the fun things about this job is that I can still be surprised by a platform where people are making, upwards of $50,000 a year, in some cases $1 million a year.
Wow.
It's a big business, and I don't think a lot of people have stopped to consider that or even realize that it exists. And one of the reasons for that is because it's not like a lot of our other creator businesses, a video-first platform. It's text and it's animation, it's drawing, but it is a huge creator platform that I think more people should be thinking about and talking about when looking at the creator economy.
All right. So what do we learn from the Davids? They have two different jobs. So we should kind of get into this a little, maybe set up their positions within the company here to start.
Yeah, sure. So David Lee, like you said, is the COO and CFO of the company. So he's really looking at the business of Webtoon. And again, it's a big business, and it's, largely been really popular internationally. I think it's starting to make some waves here in the US, and I think you'll start to hear a lot more about Webtoon and their subsidiary Wattpad definitely in the months and years to come. And then David Madden runs the entertainment division, which is also fascinating because they're basically plucking the best stories from these platforms and turning them into TV shows and movies. So there's a real pathway, a real opportunity for creators who have stories, hit comics, to become, creators of a TV show, of a movie. And there's a much more clear pathway than I think a lot of creators find who are, starting out on YouTube or TikTok or some of these other platforms.
All right, a lot to dive into there, so let's just get to it. Here's Natalie's conversation with David Lee and David Madden from the NAB show stage in Las Vegas.
Hello. Thank you all for being here. I'm Natalie Jarvie, and I write a newsletter with the Ankler called Like and Subscribe. It's all about the creator economy. And today you're here to learn about Hollywood's IP goldmine, comics, fandoms, and creators building new worlds with two Davids from Wattpad and Webtoon. First, we've got David Lee, who's the COO and CFO of Webtoon. And we have David Madden, who is the global head of entertainment for Wattpad Webtoon Studios. Now, I'm not sure how many of you here are familiar with what a Webtoon is. Webtoon is a hugely popular company. They've got 160 million active users around the world, but a lot of you may not have heard of a webcomic unless you maybe have a teenager, and then you probably have heard about it. So Webtoon Entertainment began in Korea to give these kind of digital web comics and has grown into this global platform with a huge audience. They've also acquired a company called Wattpad that is a platform for people to self-publish their, online stories. And we can touch on that part of the business in a little bit. But first, David, why don't you tell me a bit more about Webtoon and, specifically web comics? Give people a full scope of what it is.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone listening in. What we have here at this company called Webtoon is a digital storyboard company where there are 120,000 new stories that arrive every day to this platform. And our core consumer, our core demographic is the 18 to 25-year-old Gen Z consumer. These are native digital consumers. They're thinking about looking at a TikTok reel or in the palm of their hand, just flicking for a fraction of a second to see where a story is going. This category, which our founder created originally in Korea, has now taken over the world. In fact, the majority of our 160 million monthly active users are now outside of Asia. They're here. And one of the things that I found amazing as we got to know the company is we asked our North America consumers, these Gen Z consumers who can pick any format of any story anywhere. And something like 77% of them say that they can't get the stories they see on our platform anywhere else. Something like north of 95% say that their experience is more fun than even great companies like Roblox or TikTok or Netflix. So what we have may seem, for those of us who are older, something that's called a comic in a web format, but really this is a brand new digital category. And David can tell you better than I that it's a great success on our platform, but it's now spawned over 900 different adaptations, different projects. I think 2 of Netflix's all-time top 10 projects were originally stories. One in Spanish, Through My Window, and another that started in Korea. So I hope over time, more and more consumers enjoy our stories, but also more and more folks in the industry begin to see that we're a bit of the evergreen source of stories that I think a lot of folks in this room might need.
I want to get to how you're mining your IP into Hollywood. But first, let's stick with you, David Lee, for a second. What is it that you think is so engaging for people about webcomics and webtoons specifically? Like, what are you hearing from people about what they're loving, about what they're getting on your platform?
There's something unique about this category. I think in the world we currently live in, it turns out that our consumers, particularly the consumers that are our core, these younger consumers, they want a story that they didn't expect to find. They want to discover a story from a creator in some part of the world that they had never seen or heard of before, almost like discovering something in social media. So on the one hand, you have this fresh source of news stories that arrive every day, curated so that this user-generated content is actually high quality, which I hadn't seen in the industry before using tech. On the other hand, you have a format where they're spending an average of 30 to 60 minutes every day on stories that they increasingly choose to engage on. See, we have a very patient business model. We don't force subscriptions on anyone. We call her Maddie, our core consumer. She gets to surf for free for as long as she wants, to see these unexpected news stories arrive every day. It's only when she wants to make a very small micropayment that she can see an episode that's dropping. And what we find is allowing this core consumer to discover on their own what they feel like is a creator that they might become one day, to be part of this creator economy, as it's called today, is a big part of the reason why they like discovering stories on our platform. I think the genuine notion that they're part of something that they could be a creator in is a big draw for the consumption as all the lights turn on.
You talk about the microtransactions, the payments that people can make. They're small, but they've turned into a huge business for you. The company went public last year and had annual revenue of $1.4 billion. That's a lot of money. So tell me a little bit more about, kind of how you're able to, turn these very small payments into this very large business.
Our 24 million creators, the very large percent of them, they have full-time jobs. And we have stories of graphic designers you'll hear about, full-time kindergarten teachers that then told a story in our platform that became a hit film or series or story where they made a great living as digital creators on the Webtoon platform alone. So when you think about how we make money, 80% of this 1.4 billion, 1.35 to be correct, in revenue from last year are just from patient micropayments by our consumers globally who can't get these stories from anywhere else. The reason why we like it is if we are patient with our consumers, it pays our creators off. They have the ability to find a genuine connection, very low involvement for that initial story. And then we know that our consumers, once they're hooked on a story, it's a natural behavior for them to digitally see what's coming out next, what's going to drop next week on a weekly beat. It's created a lot of organic loyalty. So we haven't had to buy in tech what we call in consumer tech top of funnel audience because we find that people naturally increase what they want to read. And then, unlike other places, if Maddie finishes an entire series, which could span years, by the way, she has confidence that she's going to find the next series. Our content doesn't expire because we have 120,000 stories arrive every day to the platform.
David Madden, I'm sure Hollywood is very interested in finding ways to connect with someone like Maddie. What are you hearing from Hollywood when you come to them and talk about the audience that you're able to build around your IP on these platforms and how that might resonate with them if they're choosing to, maybe greenlight a movie based on one of your stories or a TV show?
Well, for better or worse, Hollywood is very focused on IP. It has been over the last several decades, and it's getting harder and harder to get an original idea made, as we all know who live in it. But there's only so much IP that goes around. There's only so much Marvel or DC or remakes of 1970s movies. What we bring is IP that actually feels genuinely different. It's coming from a whole different planet. We have all sorts of data around it. There are stories that have what we call reads. Reads in our world means somebody's read a chapter. It does not necessarily mean somebody's read the whole thing. But we have things that are in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, sometimes in the billions of reads. So we have audience that we can reach because they're on our platform daily, weekly, monthly. So we're not just a repository of IP. We're actually also a marketing engine because we can tell those people, hey, a movie's coming, a show is coming. But also, I think what's really different about our IP is that, as David mentioned, the creators on both Webtoon and Wattpad actually are people coming from all over the world. They are telling their unique stories on the platform. And they aren't people who have been raised on the west side of Los Angeles or don't have agents with fancy places. They don't know the rules. They don't know what they're supposed to write in order to sell to Hollywood. So they write what they write. And, I'm way older than I would ever want to admit to a member of the press. So I've been doing this job for a long time. But there are many times where I've read a Webtoon or read a Wattpad story and say, oh, I never heard that idea before. And that's an extraordinary thing for me to be able to say. And I think that's been true for the buyers that we come to. So I think the fact that we have stories that A, have an audience, B, have a lot of data behind it. And for companies like Netflix or Apple or Amazon, that obviously they thrive on data, we thrive on data, so we can speak the same language. But we also have stories that feel truly different. And that has been a really powerful tool when we approached Hollywood with the stories that we want to tell.
I'm not going to ask you to say how old you are on stage, but
69.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say, though, that you have been working in the entertainment business for a long time as an executive, as a producer. You're behind some of my favorite TV shows and movies, The Americans, Better Call Saul, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So you have a lot of history of understanding both what Hollywood wants to make and also what audiences want to see. And I am curious, what drew you to Wattpad Webtoon Studios? What about it excited you and made you feel like there was opportunity here that you could help Hollywood navigate?
Well, if I'm going to tell the truth, which I guess I should, I had left a job back in 2022 and I was starting to try to figure out what I was going to do next. And I was negotiating a producer deal for myself at one of the studios, but I kept thinking, well, I'm going to start my own company, and all anybody wants is IP, and how am I going to get any IP? Who's going to give it to me? And I got a phone call from a headhunter, an executive recruiter, and he called me and he said, have you ever heard of Wattpad Webtoon Studios? And I said to him, I know the third word you said. I don't know those other two words. What were those? And I was basically telling her I didn't really know. So I walked in totally clean slate. I didn't really know what I was walking into. But after both many meetings and also reading a lot of the material on both platforms, I had the experience that I was kind of relating to earlier, where I said, wow, these things feel really different. And there's a way I know how to sell them, but there's also a way I know how to enjoy them. And one thing I've learned about myself, whether I've been a producer or an executive, is I can't be involved in producing something or even selling something if I don't personally like it. I've done that too many times and failed too many times doing that. But there's so much stuff that I really found that I loved in these platforms. So I leapt in, mostly I say for the material, but also the people. I mean, he's a jerk, but no, I'm kidding. But no, the people other than me, but the people I work with, whether it's been senior people like David or JK, our founder, but also the team that I have, most of whom are less than half my age, has been really fun. And so it's that combination of material and people, and then actually the validation of seeing the marketplace respond to the material that we have, that's made me really excited to be here.
So I should back up and explain Wattpad and Webtoon are two separate platforms. We've talked a little bit about Webtoon and webcomics and what that looks like. Wattpad is a platform for self-published stories, and Webtoon acquired Wattpad in 2021. Is that correct? 22. Okay. A little bit before you got there, David Lee, but maybe you could explain kind of what made them like kind of logical partners and sister companies.
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me take a step back. For us, it's all about the creators. By the way, we're the only company that from 2017 to 2022 fair shared $2.8 billion in revenue with creators. We're the only company that can go to a creator and say, yeah, we have all this data. We know actually before you even do that you're going to be a superstar, but we will enable your success across the globe on our platform, off our platform, and we will fair share it with you. That is the underlying reason why we are attracted to creators and why we can genuinely meet them as equals as we create this business. The reason why that relates to this business is it turns out there are a lot of web novelists out there, a lot of full-time employed folks who have a story to tell, but they're not quite sure how to tell it, but they can oftentimes write it as a novel. Over the last 20 years, we figured out how to use data, tools, AI, tech to enable these creators to not just be able to tell their story as a web novel, which is primarily the format that Wattpad, the business that we just mentioned here in North America and globally, focuses on, But we've helped them then transition in this new category that we call a web comic or a webtoon. And it turns out this category we created because it has enough motion and dynamic imagery and just a few words that get translated very easily across cultures. I call them digital storyboards. It turns out that they can become very, very successful quickly across multiple countries and languages. So when Mary, my husband, as an example, was 4 or 5 years ago, a hit web novel, we enabled that team to be able to make into a hit web comic that went global. That ended up being in January of 24 last year, a North America and a global hit for Amazon Prime, just as an example. And by the way, when things cross over, thanks to David's help, to one of the studios, we have Studio N, which is our Asia-based studio, and WWS, our studio here in North America. We love that it's a great film because it rewards the creator, but we also love that it draws consumers back from a fandom standpoint to, gosh, what else did they write? Where did they come from? What is this thing called Wattpad? Did they write other web novels? What's a webtoon? That's the organic way where enabling a creator to be a superstar first on our platform. You know, our professional creators make close to $50,000 on average. And in certain parts of the world, that's life-changing. The top 100 can make up to $1 million just on our platform. I mean, not taking into account the fact that we can enable them. We have New York Times bestselling authors. We have great films and series that get produced. In fact, on Netflix, I think for the last 3 years, we've created a top 10 project every quarter. That's how big this creator ecosystem and consumer signaling value is. So for us, having web novels that feed into web comics or go straight over, either way, to a hit film or TV series is a part of this ecosystem of enabling creators to do more than just write a web novel, to be a superstar.
And how are you paying them? What does that look like?
So first, again, this is a testament to JK, our CEO and founder, such patience. You know, he created a process where initially it's really hard, by the way, to construct a platform in multiple languages where anyone with a full-time job can tell a story easily. There's a lot of tech and tools that we had to create. We call it Canvas here in English. In Japan, it's called Indies. We make it super easy for any amateur to be able to tell their story for free. We let it get consumed for free. And we see where there's heat. We knew, for example, there was a great graphic designer in New Zealand named Rachel Smythe. She thought she had a story to tell. We would never predicted that this hit story called Lore Olympus would emerge. You know, it's a kind of a romantic comedy with a theme around the Olympic gods. Not only did we not have to predict she'd be a hit, but we enabled her to go from being an amateur, because we saw it had so much heat, to say, Rachel, you should be a professional creator. And we are the best way for you to make this transition. We will fair share it with you, the future revenue potential that we both don't know how big it is. And it was really big. She became a New York Times bestselling author, and she's partnering with our studios to release a project soon.
You're talking a lot about creators. I write a lot about creators and the creator economy. Do you consider Wattpad and Webtoon part of the creator economy?
I do. I think we may be one of the greatest untold stories, given the amount of creators we have. I think we're the only company that is as dedicated to share their future success and power it with tech. And I also think we're discovering that, Maddie, our young consumers want to feel the potential of not just discovering the story they want to read. They want to feel like they're part of something where they could one day be a creator. And that's what we offer. And because of the patience of our founder and because of the talent we now have, having gone public, I think we're able to continue to grow with a model that aligns creators and consumers and investors.
So you've thrown out a few names of a few of the projects that you've adapted into film and TV. I bet a lot of people here have seen something that came from Wattpad or Webtoon and maybe didn't realize that that was where it originated. So David Madden, can you give us a few examples of just some of the projects that have already made their way to our screens?
Yeah, there are many projects that have come from Wattpad and Webtoon that we at our studio have not been involved in. They've been very successful. So there was a movie called The Kissing Booth that spawned 2 sequels on Netflix, and that was a Wattpad story. There was a movie called After that spawned 4 sequels, and that was also a Wattpad story. There's a brilliant show, which I wish we produced on Netflix, called Heartstopper. queer love story coming out of the UK. That's a Webtoon, actually a very devoted, almost frame-by-frame remake of the Webtoon. There are shows like Sweet Home and All of Us Are Dead that have been huge successes on Netflix from the animation side. And then in terms of from our studio, David had mentioned the Through My Window, A Través de la Ventana, pardon my total accent of a Spanish accent, trilogy that Netflix made. All three movies, massive successes for Netflix. The first one, as David mentioned, one of the top 10 non-English language movies in Netflix's history. And we are currently about to finish shooting a sequel to Sideline the QB and Me, which is a sequel to a film that we did for Tubi, which blew the, pardon my language, fucking doors off Tubi when it came out on Thanksgiving. And so much so that even though the movie was a romance and ended up with the two people romantically together at the end of the movie, so it was finished. When we came back from Christmas vacation, Tubi called and said, well, we want you to make a sequel. Well, what's sequel? They got together at the end of the movie. How the hell do we make a sequel? We don't care. We want it in production in March. We want it on the air in the fall. Okay, that's a good call, a scary call. But we actually figured out what we thought was a really smart way to approach it. And actually was a collaboration between the filmmakers, including the screenwriter, and the original creator, the original author, Tay Marley, to come up with the story that we are about to finish filming. And yes, it will be available in the fall.
So you described all those projects that were made not as part of your studio. I imagine that's why the studio now exists, right? Is to be able to better take advantage of the IP that you're building and move it through your own pipeline as opposed to having someone else develop it and benefit from it.
Yeah, they just wanted to give me a job too.
Fair.
I think, though, it's important. This company started as part of a subsidiary, a company within a company of this enormous tech giant in Korea called Naver. Part of the reason why the founder and our CEO, JK, and I and the rest of the team wanted to take the company public is we wanted to be self-sufficient. We reported last release nearly $600 million in the bank, and we talked about how we are positive operating cash flow in 2024. That's not because we want to just, reward our investors. It's because we want to have the ability to accelerate options to give creators and consumers a chance to see these stories, not just on our platform. And, the other thing I would mention is what David talked about is we talked about the flexibility of the format and enabling creators to go as a web novelist to a web comic. But there's an incredible diversity that the format allows for, whether it's a kind of a horror genre with Stagtown, which I know you're working on with Lucky Chap, Margot Robbie's production company, or all the other examples, whether they're romantic comedies or thrillers. The diversity of our genres mean that a creator can tell a story in any one of them, or oftentimes we see genres that we didn't think existed because it is user generated. I remember in my former career really feeling sad about the very expensive bets I would make as an exec, buying studios or game studios or proven hit makers because they had a great consumer content hit, only to realize that they were a one-hit wonder because I was betting based on one success versus betting based on what consumers are showing us on our platform they love unexpectedly from creators that we haven't even met yet. So to me, this is a big part of this is using tech to empower the source of storytelling and to use consumer trends, the data, not some of us who think we can predict what's going to be hot next season. It's a different model that I think is important.
I also want to underline quickly for the studio is even more than I have kind of alluded to thus far. We're very global. So right now we're making 7 or 8 shows in Southeast Asia, mostly in Indonesia and the Philippines, also in Thailand and in Singapore. We'll make 3 movies this year. It's in Spain, Spanish language movies. We're going to make a movie in Italy. We're shooting a movie in Italy this year, and we're doing another one at the end of the year, and I think another one in Germany. So we're global. We're not just U.S. centric, but that said, our U.S. team, there's 9 of us in L.A., film team, an animation team, and a live action television team, things we're developing in the UK, Canada, and Australia. So the fact that both platforms have these big universal audiences, we're really trying to take advantage of it and make shows for the whole world. But obviously, the US is our heart and soul.
So all this data that you've got access to, Hollywood is always trying to figure out what's going to be cool next. I mean, as much as Hollywood often kind of helps drive the conversation around what's cool and what's popular, so many executives sitting there in their corner offices, they don't know what young people are interested in or excited about. So, David, when you're out pitching projects, does it help that you've got all of this data that you can point to and you can say, like, look, this thing is already really popular on our platform and has been for however many years? Is that aiding in your conversations?
It's, as you can imagine, it's enormous. I mean, for example, we alluded to a project called Tower of God. I think we did, which is one of the biggest titles on Webtoon. Tower of God has 6.5 billion reads. Billion. Now, remember, I said a read does not somebody's read the thing start to finish, but still, there are only 8 billion people in the world. We have 6.5 billion reads. So when I can say that to a company, and I happily throw statistics around all the time, that gets somebody's attention. So, and even stories that have tens of millions, hundreds of millions is still a very meaningful audience to build a core audience for any film or television show. So that said, not every Wattpad or Webtoon property is ideal for movies and television, but some of them are radically suited for it, and we take advantage of that.
Yeah, so tell me about what you're looking for. I mean, you've got so much to work with because these are self-publishing platforms. I'm sure that there's, thousands of scripts or stories you could be reading and looking at. So how are you deciding what makes sense to be adapted?
Part of it, we actually do look at data, to be honest. We look at the things that audiences are finding most exciting, audiences are responding to. That's meaningful. We would be stupid to ignore the data that we have in hand. So we look for the things that are popular, but also we do rely a little bit on that old-fashioned thing called personal instinct a bit. And we look for very much what Hollywood looks for. We have thrillers, we have horror, we have supernatural, we have love stories. There's a lot of things we have in the YA space, but we're more and more looking at more adult themed stories. David mentioned Lore Olympus, which is big romantic fantasy based on what if the Greek gods were around in 2025, but instead of focusing on big god stuff, they're focusing on sleeping with each other. So it's got a pretty little gods, and it's magnificent and a really wonderful narrative. We have a project that, as David also mentioned, we're doing called Stagtown with Lucky Chap, which is if you could take what Lucky Chap did with things like Barbie and Saltburn and apply them to the story of a small town that has fucked up things going on. Well, given what Webtoon and Lucky Chap both are, this is really fucked up. So there's all sorts of things that we're playing with in different tones. That's a really long-winded way of saying, Natalie, we're looking for what we can sell.
So Hollywood's going through a transition right now. Certainly the, budgets are smaller than they've ever been. There's a lot of kind of like big business questions that Hollywood has to address. But on the content side, I think we're also going through this moment of maybe audiences are looking for something different. Maybe superheroes aren't as popular at the box office as they used to be. On the TV side, it seems like YA is doing really well. Certainly kind of more broadcast style procedurals. What are you finding when you're going out there and having these conversations about, kind of what people are interested in buying, but also what your audiences are maybe telling you that Hollywood should be buying more of?
We get the most inquiries, I would say, about YA, and there are Hollywood entities that are less interested in it, some that are more. Obviously, Netflix and Amazon have had tremendous success with YA that has nothing to do with us, whether it's The Summer I Turned Pretty or Never Have I Ever, those kinds of things. But we sort of rely on the value of our brand to dictate a lot of what we try to do. And I think a lot of what Hollywood comes to us for is realizing how aggressively we can reach an audience. Case in point. There was a movie that preceded me that was made called Perfect Addiction, independent movie. It was made with actually no actors I think that anybody in this room would recognize. Independent movie, sold to Amazon. They bought the movie for international, U.S. pass to the movie. Honestly, kind of candor of this room, not a particularly good movie. When the movie came out last spring, it was marketed nowhere because there were no actors in the movie to publicize except for us. It was a big book for us. So we went and told people Perfect Addiction is coming out on the platform, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks. The movie's here. It opened number 1 in 38 countries and no less than number 3 anywhere in the world. And Amazon called us and said, what the hell? How did that happen? And it's because we could reach the audience and tell them, go see this movie where you love the book and go experience the film. So we have an ability to reach an audience in a really powerful way. That's what I think when they come to us, what they want. And that's what we can deliver.
Yeah, I want to echo an important point because I think a lot of you may be new to the story. If you think about the 900 or so examples of stories that start on our platform and turn into adaptations, what David's doing, what Studio N is doing is incredibly important work. But there are so many examples where creators almost organically, because they have fandom, because they have success across multiple languages, it's not like we have to pick every single project. They emerge. And because we already have a business model where we're rooting for them and want them to be financially successful, we share that success with them. A lot of our IP adaptations are a product just of their success on our platform. Now we have the enhancement of having two great studios to be able to accelerate some of that work. But for the 20 or so years that our founder created this business, there have been countless examples of how things just bubble up. And that's what I think is unique. Of course, we have great human instinct and great executives to help us. But I think what's really unique is that we have a market signal and an empowered group of creators that surprise us actually with what's going to be hot.
So we've talked about a lot of different projects today. I'd like to maybe pull back and maybe pull in a little bit deeper on one of them and kind of look at it as a bit of a case study in our last few minutes. I think maybe the best one to do would be Through My Window, because that's a project that I think recently came to its conclusion, correct? Maybe David Lee, you could start with talking about that one bubbling up on the platform. And then David Madden, you could talk about, kind of adapting that one into a story.
So I'll start. This is before my time, so I talk like I was there firsthand, but I was not. So there was a great web novelist, and her name was Ariana Godoy, and she was a kindergarten teacher in Central America and Venezuela. And she had a great hit that turned into what David can kind of share as this project that emerged on Netflix that I think we all saw the hit on our platform. Again, I think we were pleasantly surprised to allow her and us to have the hit outside our platform on Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, it's a remarkable story. Kindergarten teacher from Venezuela has a story to tell. How is she going to get to Netflix? How is she going to get anywhere? But the books were very successful. The first movie was through the roof. And it was a forbidden romance, young lovers, but very well cast, very well produced. When they ordered 2 sequels to a kind of essentially a romantic drama, that speaks to how powerful the original movie was. And both sequels performed extraordinarily well. They wished they could make another 4th movie, but there was really no more story to tell. But Ariana Godoy is a wonderful writer. We have other projects we're talking with her about, and she values her relationship with us as much as we value our relationship with her. So it's been a really great synthesis between creator and company.
That's a Spanish language project, correct?
Spanish language.
So what are you seeing, if you have it off the top of your head, about, how much of the people who are consuming that on your platform are Spanish language, or is it finding other audiences since you are such a global platform?
So I think what we can talk about, when we were private, we could probably share more, but as a public company, the majority of our users we call rest of world. So as you started, the company began in Korea, but our audience has far surpassed the audience in Korea. In Korea, we have 50% of the general population. We're like the everyday Kleenex of digital entertainment in Korea. There have been articles written that we power most of the Netflix K-drama hits, according to one journalist. In Japan, we are at 15% kind of general pop penetration. We're the number 1 consumer app. We only started really working in earnest in Japan 2 or 3 years ago. And the big difference is we don't just go and buy content and then package it and sell it digitally. We create this local ecosystem of, in the case of Japan, Japanese creators. Like the creator of Savior of the Divine Blood was a huge hit in Japan, but he picked us because we can enable him to be a huge hit in multiple languages globally. So the power of this platform is whether you start in Central America or in Japan or in Korea, we're a category leader in audience in multiple parts of the world. So we give our creators the ability to get past their original language quickly and to use all this tech and market signal and data we have, because we really are aligned with our business model on their success being our mutual win.
I think this is probably a good place to end. I am curious about what you're seeing. Stick to the US for this question about kind of what you're seeing in the market. What needs to happen for Webtoons to become even bigger here and to become like Kleenex here, the way that they are in Korea and in other parts of the world?
First, the thing we need here is time. We don't need to prove product market fit. Our consumers are already telling us that they can't find these stories anywhere else here, and they're already engaging. It helps a lot when someone sees a huge hit on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Tubi to organically be drawn to our platform, creators and consumers. And I think that's a big part of why we have great studios. We love our studios for their success they can offer our creators, but it has a big role in creating a faster adoption curve in new geographies. And we see this, in France, we see this here, we see this in other regions. I also think that there's very little awareness. In Korea, everyone knows who we are, even though we've taken the company public. Even here, I bet a lot of people really didn't know who we were. And so that's a big part of the process that we're going to go through as a public company. every quarter of results we release, every film or TV series that David or Studio N adapts and pushes out, it will be relentless. And I think it'll just take time.
I just want to add, there's a moment in Sidelined where the quarterback who is flirting with this dancer throws a football to the dancer. She catches it. He says, "Nice catch, cheer." And she responds, "Not my name, quarterback." That meme has gone out everywhere in the planet. The New England Patriots actually posted a reenactment of that scene on social media, put it everywhere. So what do we need? We need more moments like that, which means we need more films and TV shows that catch the culture.